The oath I made to God for revenge led me to a contract marriage with the enemy's son. The palace was burning, not with flames, not yet, but with shouts, metal against metal, and the low, guttural roars of men who had waited years for this moment. Aurelia Asterlin stood at the edge of the western tower, watching it all unfold with blood drying on her gloves and a prayer still trembling on her lips. The tyrant king was falling. His banners, red and black, had been torn down from the battlements. His soldiers, once feared across the empire, now lay sprawled on marbled floors like broken statues, armor cracked open like split fruit. Aurelia didn't flinch at the sight. She had fought her way here, not with swords but with strategy. With long nights whispering into candlelight, smuggling letters beneath wine bottles, bribing captains, persuading old generals who still remembered the names of her parents, before the king had them executed under false charges of treason. Her sister, Evangeline, waited in the throne room. Younger, softer in appearance, but no less steel beneath the silk. Aurelia had cleared the path. Evangeline would rule. The coup d'etat had worked. Barely. But as the sun rose over the blood-stained capital, Aurelia felt no joy. Only silence, the kind that comes after a storm, too heavy to be relief. She turned from the window as footsteps echoed behind her. General Ronard bowed, his blade still glinting with fresh battle. "It's done," he said simply. "The tyrant is dead." Aurelia nodded once. "And the prince?" "Missing. His body wasn't found." She stiffened. That was a loose thread. The bastard son of the tyrant, infamous for his silence, his unreadable gaze, the shadows he moved in, was dangerous, not because he had armies, because he had nothing to lose. But today, she had no room left for fear. She descended the tower and made her way to the palace chapel. Empty now, aside from the cracked stained glass and the lingering smell of incense. It was here, years ago, that she had made the vow. Not in public, not in court, but on her knees, hands clasped, whispering into the cold floor. "God, if you give me the strength to bring justice, if you let my sister live to see the crown she deserves, I will do as you ask, whatever you ask, even if it costs me everything." She had kept her promise. The empire had a new dawn, but the silence of the chapel offered no instruction, no voice of divine approval, only the echo of her own heartbeat, until Evangeline entered, in robes too heavy for her frame, with eyes that had already seen too much. "Sister," she whispered, "you should rest." "I will, after the coronation." They stood in stillness, two women who had survived a fire and now had to build something new from the ashes. "I want you to have the north," said Evangeline. Aurelia blinked. "What?" "The Duke of Eldrin fell during the siege. You've commanded his forces for months already. You kept the borders alive. The people trust you. I want you to rule the territory as Duquesa de Asterlin." Aurelia hesitated. "Evangeline, this isn't a favor," said the new empress. "It's strategy. The realm needs strength at the borders, and I need you there, away from this viper's nest of nobles who will never forgive what we've done." She was right. Still, Aurelia's chest tightened. "I made a vow, Eva. I said I'd give myself over to God's will. I thought maybe I'd become a nun or a healer, something away from all of this." Evangeline stepped forward, cupping her sister's face with hands that trembled. "You don't have to give up your life to keep your promise." But Aurelia wasn't so sure. That night, as the coronation bells rang and the Empress of Asterlin took her oath before the gods and the realm, Aurelia stood in the shadows of the great hall, cloaked in dark velvet, watching, remembering, and weighing the shape of a promise that hadn't yet finished unfolding. The north was cold. Colder than she remembered. Not just the weather, the people too. They were loyal, but silent, proud, but scarred. The territory had been ravaged by beasts from the borderlands, by bandits who roamed the frozen woods, and by the neglect of a crown that had long forgotten them. Aurelia rode into the capital of Hyrest not as a noble lady, but as a warrior. and they accepted her. She rebuilt the barracks, refortified the walls, offered amnesty to old rebels, and sent food to villages forgotten in the snow. The people began to call her Lady Ironheart. But at night, she remembered the vow, the whisper, the silence in the chapel, and the sense that someone, was still waiting. It came, not in a voice, but in a letter, delivered by a messenger with trembling hands. Aurelia stared at the signature. Caelen, the bastard prince who had disappeared after the coup. Why her? Why now? And how dare he? She almost tore the letter in half. But then, something twisted in her chest, because the truth was, she had made a vow, and maybe, just maybe, this man, this enemy, this shadow from the past, was the key to fulfilling it. The letter arrived sealed in deep crimson wax, not with the imperial sigil, but with a crest Aurelia hadn't seen in years, a serpent pierced by a sword. It was the emblem of House Vorta. Once, the name had summoned fear, whispers of disappearances, of secret trials, of blood. Now it summoned only suspicion. Aurelia stared at the missive resting on her war table, between reports of wolf attacks and frozen trade routes. She didn't move to touch it. Instead, she sat in silence, the snowstorm outside lashing against the windows like a warning. It was Marius, her steward, who finally spoke. "You should read it." "I don't answer ghosts," Aurelia said. Her voice was calm, too calm. "He's not a ghost, not anymore." She looked up. "He was legitimized by decree. He's now Lord Caelen Vorta." Aurelia arched a brow. "A title forged from a dead man's name is no title at all." Marius didn't argue. He didn't need to. Because deep down, Aurelia knew. Nothing came from House Vorta without consequence. She broke the seal. The letter was brief. "Your Grace, I am aware of the vow you made before the fall. I do not question its weight, only the difficulty of its fulfillment. You seek a union that does not chain your will. I seek shelter from a name I did not choose. Let us be each other's solution. 3 years. No longer. No promises beyond what is written. If it pleases you, I will arrive by week's end to discuss terms." Caelen Vorta Aurelia read the letter twice, then again. A marriage proposal. From him. She had sworn, kneeling on blood-stained tiles beside her sister, that if they survived the coup, if they lived to see the tyrant fall, she would offer her future to peace. Even if that meant marriage, even if that meant binding herself to someone she could not love. But never had she imagined this. The bastard son of the man who'd burned her city, now legitimized by political necessity, resurfacing from exile like a relic of a war everyone was trying to forget. And yet, he offered exactly what she needed. No pressure to produce heirs, no demands of loyalty beyond the terms, no love required, a contract, a clean escape from the whispers already circling her name, that she ruled alone, too proud to wed, too cold to share her throne, that the Duquesa du Norte would wither alone, just like the land she governed. She closed the letter. "Prepare the Great Hall," she said. "If he wishes to come, then let him come." He arrived as promised, not with fanfare, no guard of honor, no banners in the snow, just a single rider in a dark cloak, leading a horse with hooves caked in frost. Aurelia watched from the balcony as he dismounted. She expected something sharp, something cruel in his posture. Instead, she saw stillness, a stillness that unnerved her more than arrogance would have. He entered the keep in silence. She received him in the solar, flanked by 2 guards, her steward, and a blazing hearth. He bowed. "Your Grace." "Lord Vorta." His eyes met hers, steel gray, unreadable. "I appreciate your hospitality," he said. "It's not hospitality, it's an evaluation." He smirked faintly. "Of my worth as a political pawn or as a husband?" "Both." She gestured for him to sit. He did. The fire crackled between them. "You want 3 years," she said. "Why?" "I want safety," he replied. And silence. From whom? Everyone. He didn't elaborate, but Aurelia could imagine. Nobles who whispered behind their fans. Ministers who questioned his existence. A court that never forgave the sins of bloodlines. You think tying yourself to my name will shield you? I think your name is the only one feared more than mine. It was an honest answer, and Aurelia respected that. She leaned forward, folding her hands. And what do I get? A husband in name only. No interference in your command. No claim to your lands. No expectation of affection. You think affection is my concern? I think loneliness is. That struck a nerve. She looked away. I made a vow, she said quietly. I won't break it. Then marry me, he said, not as a beginning, as an end. That night Aurelia stood alone on the battlements. Snow fell in soft, biting flakes. The wind carried no music, no memory, only cold. She thought of her parents, of their bodies in the hall, of the sword in her hand, the crown in her sister's, the blood that soaked her knees when she swore that if they lived, if they won, she would not seek happiness, but peace. A marriage like this was peace. And yet, her hands trembled slightly on the stone, because she was no longer a soldier in battle, no longer a girl on a palace floor. She was a woman, a ruler, and soon a wife to the son of her enemy. Let it be done, she whispered to the storm, and the storm did not answer. But the silence felt like surrender. The wedding took place exactly 1 week later. There was no music, no petals scattered on velvet rugs, no choir, no crowd, just a binding of names, a written contract signed in ink and frost. Aurelia wore no crown, no veil, only the ceremonial cloak of her house, dark as pine and stitched with silver thread. The cloak of a warrior, not a bride. Caelen wore black, not mourning, not defiance, just simplicity. In the ancient chapel of ice-carved stone that sat nestled in the cliffs, the two stood before the northern priest, a silent, gaunt man who never asked questions and never gave blessings. Because this wasn't a holy union, it was an oath, a truce in flesh and name. The priest opened the book. Do you, Aurelia of House Asterlin, Duquesa do Norte, take Caelen Vorta to be your consort and companion, under terms agreed by both parties? Aurelia did not glance at Caelen. She said, I do. The priest turned. Do you, Caelen Vorta, take Aurelia Asterlin to be your wife under the same terms? I do, he replied without hesitation. The priest closed the book. It is done. That was it. No kiss, no applause, no celebration. And yet, Aurelia felt something shift inside her. Not like a chain being placed, but like a weight being moved. Not lifted, not yet, but moved. The castle had prepared no wedding feast. Instead, a formal dinner was held, with the high-ranking officers of the north, a few old retainers, and no musicians. The air was tense. No one dared toast. No one dared speak of love. Only Marius, her steward, ventured a polite murmur. May the terms serve you well, my lady. Aurelia responded with a curt nod. Caelen, meanwhile, seemed entirely at ease. He spoke little, observed much. And when his gaze drifted to her during dinner, it was with quiet interest, not possessiveness. He did not act like a man who had just married the most feared woman in the empire. Nor did she act like a bride. But when the dinner ended, and tradition demanded the couple at least make a shared appearance in the East Tower, their shared chambers, Aurelia sighed, stood and said, Let's get this over with. Caelen rose, bowed slightly, and followed. The first night. The East Tower had been prepared with care, a single fire blazing in the hearth, the bed covered in northern furs, and 2 goblets of mulled wine on a table between armchairs. Aurelia walked in first. She tossed her cloak on a bench and unbuckled her sword belt without ceremony. I assume you'll want the left side, she said, gesturing to the larger wardrobe. I won't be staying here, Caelen replied calmly. She froze. What? I'll remain in the adjacent chambers. As we agreed, this marriage is in name only. And appearances? She asked, curious now. What if someone checks? They won't, he said. And if they do, I'm a soldier. I rise early. I'll enter and exit through the shared hall. Efficient. He gave a wry smile. You expected romance? I expected nothing. Then we'll get along just fine. He turned to go, but paused at the door. One thing, Aurelia. She looked up. If ever you need me, for more than appearances, I'll come. Something tightened in her chest. She wanted to laugh, to mock, to ask him if he thought she was some fragile girl who needed saving. But she didn't, because part of her, buried beneath years of steel and silence, wanted to believe it. Instead, she said, "Good night, Caelen." "Good night, wife." He left, and she stood alone in the glow of the fire, unsure if she felt relieved or suddenly, inexplicably, lonely. The days after the wedding passed quickly. Aurelia returned to her duties: trade disputes, wolf attacks, a food shortage in the eastern valleys. Caelen, to his credit, caused no trouble. He spent most of his time training with her soldiers, offering strategic suggestions, and walking the icy cliffs alone at dawn. Rumors swirled. The bastard son and the Iron Duchess. Whispers of power plays, of hidden heirs, of sleeping daggers. But the people of the north didn't care much for gossip. They only cared that the roads were safe and the food was warm. Still, some nights, Aurelia would pass by the east chamber and see the light still on. And once, just once, she heard music. A violin, soft, melancholic, played not with pride, but with grief. She never asked him about it, and he never offered. 1 month later, a raven arrived from the imperial court. Evangeline, now empress, had written her sister herself. "My dearest Aurelia, news of your marriage has reached even the most reluctant ears. I will not ask why. I trust your reasons. But Caelen Vorta is a name that still stirs fear here. I must ask, is he a danger? Not to you, to us. If he is not, prove it. Bring him to the capital. Let them see what you see." Ava Aurelia read the letter twice, and for the first time since the wedding, she wasn't sure how to answer. Because the truth was, she didn't know what she saw in him yet. Only that, somehow, it no longer felt like nothing. The journey to the capital took 7 days. 7 days of snowstorms and frozen forests, with Caelen riding beside the carriage and Aurelia sealed between letters, reports, and thoughts that refused to quiet. The winter seemed colder in the south than in the north, not in climate, but in the way the world watched with icy eyes. On the 8th day, the marble gates of the imperial palace opened, and Aurelia Asterlin, the Duchess of the North, entered like a shadow everyone had forgotten how to fear, but no one dared to ignore. By her side, Caelen Vorta, the illegitimate son of the late tyrant king, brought a silence sharper than any greeting. Smiles froze on noble faces. Bows were made out of duty, not affection. But it was the Empress who broke the ice. Eva crossed the ballroom with the same upright posture she had always held, even now, crowned and surrounded by advisors. When she saw her sister, she said nothing. She simply embraced her. Long, firm, as if time hadn't corroded anything. Then her gaze turned to Caelen. "Lord Vorta," she said evenly. "Welcome to the capital." He bowed with military precision. "Your Majesty." She didn't smile, but she didn't scorn him either. That was already a start. The ball was announced for the following night. Officially, it was a reception to honor the heroes of the North, a public attempt to appease the southern nobles who still whispered treason behind embroidered drapes. In practice, it was a battlefield in disguise, and everyone knew it. Aurelia wore the silver-gray mantle of her house, with the insignias of the North stitched on the shoulder, and an iron-woven necklace. No jewels, only truth. Caelen appeared at her side moments before the first chimes. He wore black again, but now with the imperial seal pinned to his chest, the symbol of reconciliation, of a new order, and together, They entered the ballroom where the world waited to judge them. Between forced toasts and rehearsed dances, a nobleman approached. "Duchess," he said, his smile sharp as a blade. I knew the late king. He was intense. It's curious to see his offspring among us now, unchained. Caelen only raised one eyebrow. Chains have been replaced by invitations, it seems. The ballroom fell silent for a beat. Then it laughed, but Aurelia noticed the eyes around them. Not everyone laughed. Some only waited for something to break. "They want to see you stumble," she told him later, when they stepped onto a balcony. "They want a reason to delegitimize me. To say I brought an enemy within our walls." "Then they'll be disappointed," Caelen murmured. "Because I don't stumble. I bite." Aurelia looked at him. And for the first time, she realized the anger in him wasn't for the insult. It was for the way they looked at her. She turned away before the warmth in her chest betrayed her. By the end of the ball, an envoy from House Windthorn, a family once loyal to the tyrant king, approached Caelen. "We didn't expect to see you so tamed," the man whispered. "Do you really think they'll accept you among those who burned your bloodline?" Caelen didn't reply. But when Aurelia met the envoy's eyes, her voice was steel. "He doesn't need to be accepted. He was chosen. By you, by justice, by the new era, and yes, by me." The man stepped back, not because of what she said, but because of the way Caelen looked at her afterward, like she had done something impossible. Chosen him, and said it aloud. That night, in the palace guest room, Aurelia found something she didn't expect, an old letter tucked among her belongings. It was Eva's handwriting, addressed to her, but written before the coronation. She hesitated before opening it. "Aurelia, if you're reading this, then you survived. Maybe even won. But if one day you doubt who you are, remember the North. The nights we slept on stone floors. The vows we made without witnesses. And that love, for people like us, may not come easily, but it doesn't have to be impossible." The letter ended with a single word. "Love, if you can." Aurelia folded the letter, sat in silence for long minutes, and then, for the first time in years, she cried. Alone, without shame, because maybe, just maybe, she wasn't as alone as she thought. It was nearly midnight when a knock echoed through the guest chamber. Not loud, not hurried, but steady, like the rhythm of a heart too proud to beat faster. Aurelia opened the door without her mantle, still in her inner robes, her braid half undone. And there stood Caelen, equally unarmored. No black cloak, no gloves, just a man with wind in his hair and something sharp in his eyes. But not a blade, something closer to fear. "Did I wake you?" he asked, though they both knew he hadn't. "No," she said softly. "I couldn't sleep." He didn't ask why. Perhaps he already knew. Instead, he stepped in, closed the door behind him, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. Caelen broke the silence first. "I was taught that marriage was a political tool, a contract, a way to keep peace between bloodlines too proud to bow." Aurelia raised an eyebrow. "You proposed one." "I did," he agreed. "But I didn't expect it to matter." She crossed her arms, wary. "And does it?" Caelen looked at her then, not at the Duchess, not at the warrior, but at the woman who had stood beside him in a ballroom of ghosts and didn't flinch. "It does," he said simply. Her heart did something unfamiliar then, something unarmored. "I've kept every part of our deal," she replied carefully. 3 years, no obligations, no expectations. "I know." "Then why are you here?" Caelen stepped closer, not with aggression, with gravity. "Because when you stood up for me tonight," he said, voice lower now, "I realized something. Every oath I've ever made, revenge, loyalty, survival, they were all for things I'd lost. But you," his voice caught just slightly, You're not something I want to lose." Aurelia turned from him, not in rejection, in fear of how much she wanted to believe him. "You are the son of the man who killed our parents," she whispered, "and I am the sister of the woman who took his crown. I know." "Do you?" she asked, facing him again, jaw tight. "Because loving me, even trying, would put you in the center of a fire that hasn't stopped burning." "Then let it burn," he said. "I've survived worse." His hand brushed hers, not to pull her in, but to offer a choice. And she, daughter of grief, Duchess of the Wild North, keeper of oaths and silence, took it, not with words, but with her fingers curling into his. The next morning, no proclamations were made, no declarations, no court gossip, only a quiet shift. Caelen walked beside her now, not as an obligation, but as something chosen, and when they left the palace to return to the north, something in the air had changed. The guards stood straighter, the snow melted a little faster, and the people whispered not about fear, but about something far more dangerous in a place like this. Hope. It was the third week after their return to the north, when the silence shattered. Snow had begun to crust the edges of the cliffs again. The rivers, once thawed, slowed with ice. Life had settled into a rhythm, one Aurelia had never thought possible. The people had stopped calling Caelen the tyrant's son. They had begun calling him Duke Consort, a title born of respect and perhaps curiosity. Aurelia had begun to sleep without a blade under her pillow, until the rider came. No banner, no seal, just black leather, frost on his cloak, and eyes like a war survivor, not because of what he'd fought, but because of what he'd carried. The guards let him through because he bore a letter marked with the Empress's sigil. But what he delivered was not royal. It was personal. The message was simple. 8 lines, written in a precise, elegant hand that Aurelia hadn't seen in years. "To the one who bears the Duke's name and the North's burden, you made an oath to God the night we rose against the tyrant. You swore you would protect what the crown could not. That oath is being called. A girl has been found, hidden in the ruins of the southern monasteries. She bears the same blood as Caelen, and she carries something older than any of our kingdoms. Choose wisely, Duchess. Some vows are heavier than crowns." There was no signature, but the seal beneath the wax was unmistakable. The Order of the Black Flame, the same holy knights who had once protected the divine relics, and who had vanished when the tyrant king took the throne. A history. Neither could escape. Aurelia stared at the letter. Her hands didn't shake, her face didn't betray fear, but Caelen saw it in her eyes. "What is it?" he asked. She handed him the parchment. He read it. Twice. Then again. His jaw tightened. "This can't be true. They wouldn't write this unless it was," she said. "There are no survivors. My father made sure of it." "And yet," she looked up at him, her voice steel. "They found someone, a girl with your blood, a relic bearer." Caelen turned away, 1,000 ghosts crowding his shoulders. "I didn't ask for this," he muttered. Aurelia crossed the room, slow and deliberate. "Neither did I." He turned back to her. "You don't understand. If she's real, if she carries a relic, the nobles will use her as a symbol. The church will want her as a pawn, and my blood taints everything." Aurelia stepped closer. "Then we protect her." He blinked. She held his gaze. "That's what we do now. You and I. We protect what the world would use and discard, whether it's a girl, or a kingdom, or a broken oath." They left the next morning, not with fanfare, not with soldiers, just the two of them. Aurelia in her traveling leathers, Caelen in a cloak that covered the scars the world still whispered about. The snow didn't care for titles. The wind bowed to no crown. But when they rode together, not as strangers, not as enemies, but as something stronger, something rarer. 2 broken pieces that somehow, when placed together, made something whole. The southern monasteries were nothing more than skeletal remains of stone and silence. Once holy places, now forgotten by kings and desecrated by fire. The path there was treacherous, not because of bandits or beasts, but because of the weight of what they might find. Caelen hadn't spoken in hours. Aurelia let him ride in silence. Some truths, she'd learned, didn't need to be dragged into the light all at once. They surfaced like frost breaking over frozen water, jagged, sudden, and cold. When they arrived, the sky was the color of bruised ash. A wind blew through the crumbled arches, carrying whispers of prayers never finished. And in the center of what had once been the chapel, where the altar used to stand, stood a girl, no older than 14. Hair like rusted gold, tangled and unkempt. Clothes too thin for the cold. Hands raw from stone. But her eyes were the same gray as Caelen's. She looked at them, not with fear, not with awe, with recognition, like she had been waiting. In her palm she held a stone, no bigger than a coin, a relic in her hands, but the air around it shimmered, as if the very world bent around the thing she carried. Aurelia felt the pressure in her chest the moment she stepped closer. "Who are you?" she asked. The girl tilted her head. "I'm the consequence," she said softly. And the answer. Caelen dismounted slowly, every step weighed by something deeper than pain. He walked to her, hands open. "Do you know who I am?" he asked. The girl nodded. "You're the reason I lived." And then she did something neither of them expected. She walked forward and placed the relic in Aurelia's hands. Not Caelen's, hers. The moment the stone touched Aurelia's skin, her vision shattered. She stood on a battlefield where banners of gold and crimson tore through clouds of ash. At her feet, a sword. In her hand, a broken crown. She saw a palace crumbling, not from war, but from betrayal. She saw Caelen on a throne of frost, alone. And she saw herself, walking away from it all, toward a forest where no name held weight. And then, the vision faded. The relic fell to the ground, its glow dimming. Aurelia gasped. Caelen caught her before she could fall. The girl, calm as moonlight, simply whispered, "It shows you what could be, not what will be." Back at the campfire, hours later, Aurelia sat silent. The girl, her name was Lina, ate with slow, methodical grace, as if food was still something she didn't fully trust. Caelen sat beside Aurelia, his shoulder brushing hers. "What did you see?" he asked. Aurelia didn't answer right away. Finally, she whispered, "A warning." He nodded. "And?" She turned to him. "And a choice." He reached for her hand beneath the furs. "You don't have to do this," he said. "I know. You could leave, live in peace. Forget the relic. Forget the oaths." She looked at him then. Really looked. "You think I'm staying because of duty?" He blinked. "I'm staying," she said, "because somewhere between the blood and the silence, I started to believe in you." Caelen exhaled, and it sounded like a prayer. That night, with Lina curled beside the fire and the stars spilling across the sky like scattered promises, Aurelia watched the flames dance. She no longer felt like a woman running from death, or a warrior chasing justice. She felt like something else entirely. A keeper of fragile hope, a bearer of broken oaths, a duchess by name, but something much greater by choice. And as Caelen wrapped his cloak around both of them, and their hands tangled under the night, Aurelia asked the question that had begun to take root in her heart. What if this wasn't just a contract? At dawn, the sky cracked open with thunder. Not a storm, but the arrival of riders, 7 of them, dressed in white and crimson, colors not of royalty, but of the Church of the Flame. They bore no flags. They didn't need to. Their presence alone was declaration enough. Aurelia watched from behind the veil of trees as the horses came to a halt near the ruins where Lina had once stood. Caelen stood beside her, sword at his hip, gaze locked and sharp. "They're early," he muttered. "You knew they would come?" He didn't answer, but the tension in his jaw said enough. Lina, hidden behind them, didn't tremble. Instead, she looked at the figures below with a kind of haunted familiarity. "They were there the day it burned," she whispered. Aurelia turned. "The monastery." Lina nodded. "They took what they wanted and left the rest." From among the riders, one dismounted. He was older, robes pristine, face too serene for someone surrounded by scorched ruins. His voice was like honey stirred with steel. "Lord Caelen," he called, "and Duchess Aurelia, if I'm not mistaken." So they knew. Of course they did. Caelen stepped forward, hands behind his back. "Archwarden Malrek." The priest bowed slightly. "You've found something that belongs to the church." Aurelia's spine stiffened. "A person is not property." Malrek smiled. "We don't seek to claim the girl. We only wish to protect her. A child born of divine prophecy should not be left in the hands of soldiers." Caelen cut in. "Warriors," Malrek corrected, "who've spilled blood in the name of crowns." "And your kind hasn't?" Aurelia asked. A beat of silence. Then the Archwarden's eyes landed on her. "You speak with conviction, my lady. I wonder how long it will last, when you realize the girl is not what you believe." That night, after the priests had been sent away with carefully chosen words and an unspoken threat, Lina sat between them by the fire. "I know why they want me," she said. Caelen raised an eyebrow. "Do you?" Lina nodded. "I was born the night the sky turned gold, the last relic bearer. The priest said I would either bring salvation or destruction." Aurelia's breath caught. Lina looked down at her hands. "They kept me in the monastery to test which." A long silence followed, until finally Aurelia said, "You're not a weapon." Lina met her eyes. "Then what am I?" Caelen answered this time. "You're a person, and your choices will define you, not their prophecies." 2 days later, they received the message. An ultimatum: return the girl to the church, or be excommunicated. Aurelia read the parchment once, then tossed it into the fire. "I never asked for their blessings," she muttered. Caelen watched the flames devour the seal. "They'll come again, with more than threats next time. Then we'll be ready." That evening, for the first time in months, Aurelia couldn't sleep. She stood outside the tent, staring up at the sky, arms crossed tight over her chest. Caelen approached silently. "You're worried?" "No, I'm furious." He tilted his head. "I gave everything for this empire," she said. "For peace, for justice, and now they dare call me unfit to protect a child they abandoned?" He stepped closer, eyes softening. "You're not alone in this." She turned to him, and he didn't hesitate. His hands framed her face, not in a gesture of conquest or passion, but something more fragile, protective, reverent. "I don't want 3 years," he said. Her breath caught. He whispered, "I want a lifetime." The church did not wait. 3 days after Aurelia rejected their ultimatum, the capital's cathedral bells rang without cause, a sound reserved for war, coronation, or condemnation. That night, across the empire, word spread like fire. The Northern Duchess has sheltered a heretic child. She defies the Church of the Flame. A traitor, married to a prince born of tyranny. In markets and taverns, whispers grew teeth. In courtrooms and council chambers, nobles exchanged letters laced with fear. And in the sanctuaries where prayer once felt safe, silence fell heavy. In the heart of the imperial city, Empress Evangeline slammed her palm against the marble table. "Do they forget who bled for this crown?" she hissed. Around her, the High Council sat in various shades of discomfort, some loyal, others quietly turning their heads toward the church's rising power. "They don't forget," said Chancellor Mareth grimly. "They simply choose to believe in safer gods." The Empress turned to the messenger who had arrived, breathless. "Send word to the north. Tell my sister, she has my sword, my army, and my silence, if she still wants it." The messenger blinked. "Your Majesty?" Evangeline leaned back in her throne. "If she's about to wage war against the church, then I'll need to decide whether I want to stand beside her or pretend I never knew her at all." In the cold stone chamber of Caelen's northern keep, Aurelia stood before a map of the empire. Her eyes traced borders, roads, riverways that now held more danger than passage. Lina sat curled on a window bench behind her, reading a book, or pretending to. Caelen entered, his expression unreadable. "They've declared you an enemy of faith," he said. "I thought that was obvious when I refused to give up a child to zealots." He didn't smile. Instead, he approached and set a parchment on the table. "They're calling for a tribunal. They want you in the capital, for questioning." She picked up the scroll, read it, then dropped it into the nearest candle. "No. They'll take your lands." "Let them." He stepped closer. "They'll try to take your life." She looked up. Her voice was steady. "Then they'll learn what happens when you threaten a woman who's already lost everything." A war of faith. The first skirmish came not with swords, but with ink. Church envoys arrived in nearby villages, offering sanctuary to any who denounced the Duchess's rule. Temples once protected by Aurelia's coin turned their backs on her soldiers. Farmers feared their crops would be cursed for even speaking her name. And through it all, Aurelia refused to kneel. She fortified the northern borders. She wrote to the Empress only once, "If I fall, let it be on my own terms." It was Lina who changed everything. One night, while hiding with Caelen's scouts near a church-held town, the girl saw a priest strike a woman for offering food to a northern soldier. Lina stepped forward. "Leave her," she said. The priest turned, laughing. "And who are you, child?" Lina didn't answer with words. She stepped into the firelight, raised her hand, and for a breathless moment, the flames bent toward her, not away. The crowd gasped. The priest stepped back, and someone whispered, "Saint." A new legend. From that night on, rumors spread faster than the church could burn them. The girl walks with fire, but is not burned. She healed a soldier with just a touch. She carries the blessing of the true flame. And suddenly, the narrative shifted. Aurelia was no longer a traitor harboring a heretic. She was the guardian of a chosen child, a protector of prophecy. And the church? They began to lose control. One night, one promise. In the quiet of the war tent, Caelen found Aurelia staring out at the snow. "She's changing everything," she said. "She's just a child. She's more than that. She's hope." He stepped beside her. "And you?" She turned to him, tired but unbroken. "I don't know what I am anymore. Duchess, general, rebel." He took her hand. "You're mine." And when she leaned into him, forehead to his chest, he whispered, "Whatever comes next, we face it together." The capital was burning, not with fire, but with something far more dangerous: doubt. Nobles walked the marble halls of the palace whispering of omens. Merchants in crowded squares sold wood carvings of a girl wrapped in flame, and in hidden corners of temples, even priests began to ask questions they once feared to voice aloud. Could it be true? Had the church lied? Was the Duchess protecting not a heretic, but a holy child? A sister's silence breaks. Evangeline stood at the window of the imperial throne room, watching the sun rise over a city choking on uncertainty. Behind her, ministers argued. Some demanded the Empress distance herself from Aurelia. Others begged her to crush the church's growing power. And one, the youngest of her advisors, simply whispered, "If your sister is right, then we've been bowing to the wrong gods." Evangeline said nothing, not until the chamber emptied. Then, slowly, she walked to the center of the room, drew her sword, the same one she had raised in the coup against the tyrant king, and laid it across her lap as she sat on the throne. And when the high priest of the church was announced at the doors, she did not stand. "Your Holiness," she said coldly. Choose your next words carefully. I only bow to gods who bleed for their people. The prophet girl. Back in the north, Lina was no longer just a child. She was becoming a symbol. Her mere presence calmed panicked villagers. Wounded soldiers rose faster after hearing her speak, and one night, when the church sent assassins cloaked in priests' robes to silence her, the blades melted in their hands before they ever reached her. Caelen saw it all, watched with narrowed eyes. She's changing, he murmured. Aurelia stood beside him. So is the world. He turned to her. You still have time to walk away from this. I walked into it the day I chose to protect her. He nodded. Then we walked together. At the great temple near the imperial border, the church prepared for one final show of strength, a public declaration, a new truth. They would name the girl a demon, call Aurelia a blasphemer, burn their likenesses in the square. But when the torch was lit, it wouldn't catch. Again and again, the fire refused to consume the painted effigies of the Duchess and the girl. The crowd gasped. And then, slowly, they turned away from the altar, turned toward the woman walking through the square without armor, without crown, but with the girl at her side. Aurelia raised her voice. Faith is not fear. Power is not cruelty. And a child's light will not be dimmed by liars in golden robes. Silence. Then, someone knelt, then another, and another, until half the square was on their knees, not to the church, but to her. Back in the capital, the Empress sat at her desk, quill in hand. The declaration was short. By imperial decree, the Northern Duchess shall henceforth be recognized not as traitor, but as protector of the flame. The child Lina is to be honored, guarded, and taught freely, not hidden in fear. The church no longer speaks for the empire. We answer to truth. We answer to those who bleed with us. She signed it, then sealed it with the imperial crest. That night, as the fires of resistance gave way to quiet celebration, Caelen found Aurelia standing alone. She's safe, he said. You've won. Aurelia exhaled. Then why do I feel like I've lost something? He stepped forward. You made a vow once, to fight for your sister, then for your people, then for a girl no one else would protect. She turned to him. What vow will you ask of me now? He smiled, rare and small. None, just stay. She looked at his outstretched hand. For once there was no war behind it, no demand, just a question, a possibility. And for the first time in years, Aurelia let herself say yes. The quiet after flame years passed. The empire changed. The church fractured, retreated into silence. The Empress ruled wisely, always with letters from the north stacked at her bedside. Lina grew into a leader of her own, not a saint, not a soldier, but a symbol that kindness was not weakness. And Aurelia? She remained in the north, with Caelen. Not as a warrior, not even as a duchess, but as a woman who had once made a vow in the dark and had, against all odds, kept it in the light.